Welcome back to the Mildew Twang Outdoors podcast, where we chronicle our time spent in the Delta, the swamps, the piney woods, and beyond. Here, we share our experiences and stories ranging from simple country living to lesser-known stories of Southern American culture and what all of this means for us as Christians in today's world. Today's episode is going to be a bit longer than normal, and it will not necessarily follow the same format that you're used to. However, I believe that in order to better understand me, and in order to understand more effectively the topics that we will be covering through the course of this podcast, this particular episode is critical. I invite you to sit in your lazy boy recliner and listen along as we hear stories from some wonderful people. The word of the day today is leadership. What characteristics mark a true leader? Regardless of where you are or what stage of life you are in, I guarantee that this singular word evokes a deeply ingrained set of emotions. It may bring back the memories of a Little League coach sternly and passionately coaxing your team to win a small town championship. It might bring back memories of long sits during church as the pastor, dressed to the T in his starched white shirt and charcoal pinstripe suit, brings forth the gospel message. The term leadership might remind you of the many long training courses you've had in the workplace, drawing out a long and distraught sigh as you face the reality of grown-up circumstances. The truth of the matter is that entire careers are built on learning how to understand leadership and how to teach others to become true leaders in their own rights. Why does this matter at all, you might ask? I've been blessed beyond measure to have been born to a family of loving, kind, and passionate Christian parents. Likewise, they were brought up by loving, kind, and passionate Christian parents. Can you see where this is going? My grandparents, both on my mother's side and on my father's side, have had a direct and an immediate impact on my life in every area. They demonstrated true Christian leadership and a love for Christ as they helped shape my life and the lives of my siblings. Okay, Jay, okay, enough of this technical jargon. Where is all of this going? I am so glad that you've asked. And if you didn't ask, well, I'd just pretend that you did anyway. All right, guys, today I have a group of wonderful folks with me. In fact, without these particular individuals, according to my high school biology class, I don't think I would be here at all. I'm pleased to introduce you to my grandparents, Nellie and Dean Caldwell, or as we call them, Grammy and Pawpaw. It's great to have you both here on the show.
Thank you.
Very
We're
good.
glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Glad you're here.
Thank you very much. Now that I've finally convinced you guys to come on down here, well, the family did really, we have a lot of things going on this weekend with get-togethers, my parents' 32nd anniversary, and my baby nephew's dedication, baby Noel, named after you, Pawpaw. We finally got you guys down here to sit with me and record some stories. I'll let you take the floor and run with this. You can argue over who wants to go first. But I would like to hear a little about where you grew up, how you grew up, and we can go from there. My goal is to highlight some key points in your life and how those things have influenced our family over the years.
Half of my growing up years in the Delta and Boonville, Mississippi. And when I was in the 10th grade, I met a wonderful, wonderful man and was smitten by him. He can tell you what he did with it.
So, Pawpaw, that must have been you, right?
I suppose so. I grew up in North Mississippi around Boonville. My dad was a farmer, and he was a sharecropper, which means he didn't own any land, but he would farm land that belonged to somebody else, and the owner of the land would take a share of the harvest which was his pay for renting the land. And when I was about 4 years old, we moved to a farm that my daddy bought. He bought a large 40-acre farm, and I grew up on that farm. But I did very little farming. My dad had started wiring houses and doing a little plumbing work. And so from about the time we bought the farm, he went more into the plumbing and wiring business than he did farming business. And he rented his land out to other folks who were sharecroppers. So I grew up mostly helping my dad do plumbing and electrical work. And then, as she said, about 67 or 8 years ago, I was probably a senior in high school, and I met this nice-looking, very pleasant young lady in high school.
Me.
And a couple of years after that, after I had graduated from Northeast Junior College, we were married. That'll be 65 years ago this May. We went together down to Mississippi State. I got an engineering degree, and she got a PhD, which was
Putting hubby through.
Yeah, so she worked and bought the groceries, and I went to school, and from there we went on to Memphis, lived there, worked for the Corps of Engineers for 37 years.
Yes, sir. Now, jumping back in time real quick, you mentioned that you had done some electrical work and some hands-on work with your daddy. So
Right.
that's how you know how to fix almost everything that exists.
Well, I don't know about that. My dad was pretty sharp. Actually, the way he got into the business, we lived in an area where there was not electricity yet. So the power company came through putting up the electric lines, and there was a man that came along in front of them wiring houses, which means he would put one light bulb in the center of the room and maybe one receptacle plug-in on one of the walls for either a fan or a radio. And so this fellow that was doing that asked my dad and his brother to help him wire houses. And they said, okay, they'd try it. So they worked for that fellow for probably 2 or 3 weeks. And then they decided, we know how to do this now, so we'll begin doing it for ourselves. And so they were electricians. And then they went to this one house, and the man said, well, yeah, I'd like to have electricity in the house, and I'd like to have a pump in my well with water piped into the kitchen. And they asked if they could do that. Well, they didn't know, but they'd try. So they went to the hardware store and bought the pipe and stuff and installed, and now they're plumbers. And so from that time, for the next 50 years, they did the majority of the houses that were built up in that part of the world.
I reckon then that a lot of the frustration I've caused my wife over the years comes from my great-grandfather and all of his family, huh? Determined to do things themselves. Brittany gets tired of me stubbornly trying to fix everything in the house. Regardless, I've learned a lot from you, and you learned from your daddy. I still call you almost every day for advice on how to finish whatever project I'm working on. But I guess it doesn't bother y'all too much.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It makes me feel good. And then in high school, I had a really close friend who was kind of a shy fellow. He'd never had dated at all, I guess. And so he and I began to notice this pretty young girl. And actually, he thought about asking her on a date, and I encouraged him. But he didn't. And then one day, I guess one night, 2 or 3 days after Christmas, December the 27th, we went to a little high school party dance that they had, and she was there. And so, she actually approached me that night. And so...
But let's clarify that. Our teacher was the hostess for that dance, and she told the girls, all right, girls, y'all go find a boy that does not know how to dance.
Yeah.
And dance with him and teach him how.
Oh, man, that's an awful lot of pressure there.
That's a lot of pressure, but I found Dean.
And that's the one thing she failed at, was teaching me to dance, but she tried. But anyway, we discovered or found out some way that she was going to have another young girl spend the night with her the next night. That would have been Saturday night. So I got a friend. Well, actually, he was the first cousin of the first friend. I got the friend to agree to go with me, and I would invite her, and he would go with the other girl, and we'd go to a movie. And we spent all day Saturday trying to call. At that time, every little town in Mississippi, and I guess most other places, had its own telephone company. And she lived probably 10 miles out of Boonville, but she was in an area where there even a smaller town called Ryanzi, Mississippi, and they had their private telephone area. And so to call her house from Boonville was long distance. In other words, they charged a fee for what they called a long distance call outside of your area. So we tried all day, and we never could get the call to go through. So finally, late that afternoon, we says, well, we'll just drive up there. So we drove up and pulled up in the yard and asked her to the movie. And she had to go get permission from her mom. And for some unknown reason, her mom agreed. And so that was our first date.
But us girls didn't know which of the boys wanted to go with which girl. And the other girl, my friend, said, I'm going with Dean, and you're going with Charlie. And I said, no, I'm going with Dean, and you're going with Charlie. So that's how we left the house going to the car. Neither of us knew which was going to go with the other. And I got to the car first, and Dean opened the door. So I got in, and he got in. So therefore, I was with Dean, and she was with Charlie. So,
and of course, Charlie and I knew. I mean, and Charlie really didn't have any interest in the other girl. And I don't guess they ever dated or anything after that, but he simply went to be with me because we knew that she had the other girl at her house.
yeah.
But that was the first date, and from there we began, they call it going steady back in those days, and ended up, 2 or 3 years later being married.
And what year again were y'all married? I can't quite remember.
1959. Yeah.
Yes, before you were even thought of.
Well before I was thought of.
Yeah, that Christmas party was, that she talked about, the dance, was in December of 1955.
Okay, so 1955. Y'all dated them for 3 or 4 years and got married in 59.
Right.
And you guys ended up having 3 children.
Right.
One of them is now famous as a podcast superstar. His nickname is Papa Nichols.
Yes,
And I have 2 aunts, Cindy and Christy.
Cindy and Christy.
And they still live up close to Vicksburg.
Right. We get to see them pretty often.
Yeah. Sometimes when I would get home from school in the afternoon, I would go pick cotton for maybe an hour before dark.
An hour.
Y'all would pick cotton for an hour?
Yeah, I would get home from school around 3:30 or 4, and I'd pick cotton for maybe an hour or two before dark. But every Saturday and every other day that I was off, and all during the summer, I'd help my dad and his brother do the plumbing and electrical work.
So you were busy.
Yeah.
Back to that cotton. Now, some folks who are not necessarily from the South either have never seen a cotton field or have never actually put raw cotton in their hands. Is there anything specific about that cotton picking that you remember or that you would like to share before we hop over?
Well, the only thing I can remember is I didn't enjoy it at all. You took in the field what they called a cotton sack, and it was just a long sack, about probably 6 feet long, she says, and about maybe 3 feet in diameter if it was full. And it had a strap on one end, and you'd put that over your shoulder and drag the thing along and pull the cotton bowl at a time with your fingers and stuff it in the sack. and you would fill up the sack, and when it's full, it would hold maybe over 100 pounds of cotton.
And you had to carry that sack or drag it behind you as you went along?
You'd drag it behind and carry it, and then they'd take it to a place where they'd have some scales to weigh the thing, and they'd dump it in the wagon and get ready to go to the cotton gin, where they remove the cotton seed. But like I say, most of my time was spent dragging wires through attics and underground and that sort of thing.
Now, Grammy, how about you? When Pawpaw mentioned picking cotton for an hour, you grimaced a little bit.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, why is that?
It's not like picking all day. I mean, you get to the field with the dew still on the cotton stalk, and you get wet from the cotton stalk, but all day long you are picking cotton. And on my 10th birthday, I picked 100 pounds, which was my goal for that day. That was the most I had ever picked, but I had to pick on my birthday. But I picked cotton a lot and hoed cotton a lot.
Now, let me ask you why that is. I know your stories, but your family would move around for work depending on the season, correct?
Right, but my daddy was foreman of a plantation, and that meant we had to work. The family had to work. So we picked cotton and hoed cotton from get-go. You know, my daddy was important because he was the foreman, but it was partly fun. Yeah. I mean, I remember a train would come by, and we would, us girls would stop and count the cars on the train just so we could spend a few minutes not picking cotton. But that was fun.
Now, how about the seeds? Pawpaw, you said that y'all took your cotton to the cotton gin?
Right.
How about you, Grammy? Did you ever have to pull the seeds?
No, I didn't pull the seeds, but if we were really good, Daddy would let us ride on the cotton to the cotton gin, which was a treat, because that was about 15 miles from where we picked cotton. That was fun.
And in the later years, as I was in high school and in junior college for 2 years, where there was a junior college in the hometown, I got my first public job other than helping my dad was running the projectors at a movie theater. And so I would go to work about 5:30 at night and run the theater till around 10 o'clock at night, carry my books and study while the movie was running. And then the next morning I would get up and I drove a school bus. Even in high school, they let me drive a school bus. So I drove a school bus for, I guess, about 3 years or maybe 4, picking up kids. So I'd pick up kids, take them to the high school, drive the bus up to the junior college, go back and pick up the kids, go home, and then an hour later I'd be going to the movie theater. And I did that 5 days a week. On Saturday, I would go to the movie theater at 10 o'clock in the morning and run until after midnight. And then Sunday afternoon from 1 to 5. And I did that for, like I say, about 3-4 years. Getting rich, making $1 an hour.
We spent a lot of our time up in the upstairs in the movie theater, and we were courting, but that was okay.
Yeah, we'd go to the movie theater anytime we were together except Sunday night, and then we'd usually go to church.
After all of your work through high school on into junior college, you ultimately became a civil engineer and worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. Can you describe the process that brought you to that point in your life?
Well, in those days, a lot of the young boys particularly wanted to be engineers because you could earn $500 a month.
And that was a lot.
And that was a lot of money. So I decided to go into engineering and went to Mississippi State after 2 years at junior college. Went down to Mississippi State to get an engineering degree. Didn't make the president's list or the dean's list, either one, but I was able to graduate and went to work in Memphis, Tennessee for the Corps of Engineers. Worked there for, 14 years, and then I moved down to the Mississippi River Commission Division Office in Vicksburg. By that time, we had three kids, 2 girls and a boy, and they grew up essentially in Vicksburg.
Jumping back over to Memphis when you started with the Corps, what was your specialty as an engineer?
Well, for the first 18 months, they put us at that time into what was called an engineer training program, in which they sent us out. I'm saying us, I mean me and the other graduates about that time. They would send us out to the various offices within the district and out on the river with the various units that were grading and paving the banks of the river to keep it from eroding, kind of things. And then for some reason, they assigned me to what was called the relocations branch in the engineering division. And what that amounted to was the Memphis district, most of the work outside the main river, Big River, was enlarging the small tributaries. And when they would enlarge the tributaries, the bridges didn't fit anymore. They were too short. In other words, the river was wider. And so they had me coordinating they called it relocation of the bridges and the power lines and things that would be in the way. So I did that for about, 2 years. And then came an opportunity to go to Washington for what was called a Planning Associates program. And there was a senior guy in the Corps up there that would every year bring up about 10 or 12 young engineers from anywhere in the country and do a crash course that actually was sort of graduate levels, but it wasn't a university. I mean, it was Corps of Engineers people, but he would teach us all about how to go about the planning of Corps projects and that kind of thing. And so I did that for a year and then came back and worked in the planning division. From that time until about 4 years before I retired down at the division office. And by that time, they had moved me down to the executive office. I was called the executive assistant to the commanding general there. But most of my career was in actually just doing coordinating work with the other engineers, and they would, evaluate prospective projects and see whether they were worth doing and how big you should build it, and writing the reports to go to the Congress to get stuff authorized and that kind of thing.
But you forgot about the most important thing you got in Washington, D.C.
That's where Tim was born. That's where your dad was born while we were in Washington. Learned a lot of lessons, particularly in that training program. And I remember one of the first times I ever went out on the river, one of the older guys out there said, "Son, let me tell you how to engineer this river." I said, "Okay." He says, "Find yourself a sponge rubber ball and you walk out and you throw it in the river and see which way it goes. And whichever direction it goes, you decide that's the way you want the river to go."
Oh, man, the mighty Mississippi.
Mighty Mississippi.
I know just the tip of the iceberg regarding the history on the Mississippi River. We've tried to control the river for years and years, and it's a hard river to tame. Now, Pawpaw, would you say that the river has been tamed as of today?
Well, they control it really well today. I mean, they back in 1927 had the Great Flood on the Mississippi River, and nobody can imagine how large that flood was. On the Mississippi side, down around Vicksburg, there was a pretty substantial levee already in place that the local people had built. But the water came up against that levee, and on the other side, the Louisiana side, the flood went all the way to Monroe, Louisiana, which is 70 miles. And so in 1928 they passed the what they call the Mississippi River and Tributaries Project to control that. And the engineers, without the aid of computers, developed a really intricate system to control that. A lot of levees, a lot of channel work on the river itself, the dikes. There's a couple of areas where they are designed to break a levee and let it flood a confined area just to reduce the level of the river everywhere else. One up in Missouri and another one down in close to New Orleans. But it's amazing to understand how those guys in those days were able to, and they would predict what the various rainfall over the valley, and the rainfall, by the way, the river drains about 2/3 of the continental United States. So they would measure the prospective rainfall and figure out how often it was going to happen, and could tell you within 2 or 3 inches of what the river level would be from that. And so tremendous job they did.
Now, I'm going to take a quick sidebar journey here. As of when this podcast is released, we will have already covered the history of the mountain men and the frontiersmen as they headed out west. The river they took away from St. Louis was the Missouri River. These men would load up the keel boats and start out west-northwest until they reached the Rocky Mountains. So as far as the grand scale of the Mississippi drainage basin, approximately 2/3 of the continental United States, that would extend, from my understanding, from the Continental Divide in the Rockies almost all the way to the East Coast with a few exceptions.
There's 3 major tributaries to the Mississippi River. The Missouri River that you've mentioned, the Ohio-Tennessee River, and then the upper Mississippi River. And for some reason, which I don't really understand, the forefathers named the Missouri River, and the Ohio River, and they named the upper Mississippi River, the Mississippi River. But that is the smallest of the 3. Normally, a river would be named for which is the longest tributary. You see what I'm saying? Or they would name the river that contributed the most amount of water. The Ohio River carries the majority of the water. So why they didn't name the Ohio branch Mississippi or the Missouri branch Mississippi, I don't know, but they chose to go straight on up north, and the upper Mississippi that goes up to almost to Canada is what they call the Mississippi River. But the Missouri River runs all the way up into Idaho and up in that part of the world.
Pawpaw, with all the discussion about the rivers, the various drainages, and the mighty Mississippi in general, there was a time in your career where you ended up on a riverboat in service of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
That's right. Beginning back in 1928, 29, the Mississippi River Commission was formed, and that's they have 3 civilian members who are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and then 3 military guys, 2 major generals in the Army, and then there was a rear admiral from the Coast and Geodetic Survey. And so they began back in around 1930 going upriver once a year or twice a year, and they would come down, stop along the way, and hold public meetings. And they did that, still do that. But in 1961, when I came to work for the Corps, they had a new boat to make those trips, and I worked a little on that boat. But right before I became the executive assistant to the general, we got another new boat, and they retired that boat. So every year, twice a year, we would go up to, at first we went to Cairo, Illinois, or St. Louis. Mm-hmm. And then later on, expanded the division all the way up to St. Paul, Minnesota. So we would come down the river, stop every day along the way, and have 100 or 200 local people come on and talk about the MR&T project, as we called it. And then we would move all night, and then the next morning have a public hearing and would end up in New Orleans at the end of the trip, or Morgan City, Louisiana. And then the wives would normally come down and ride the boat back with us just for fun back to Vicksburg.
Now, this is a random question, but it's critically important. How was the food on the boat?
Food on the boat was great. I don't know where they got them, but they had some of the best cooks that you can find. I'll tell you one little interesting story. While we were in New Orleans one weekend, Nellie had come down to ride back to Vicksburg that weekend after the commission trip. We were taken out to Antoine's, the famous restaurant there in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And they served a dessert. And I don't know that I can even describe it now, but it was a glass with some pudding stuff in it and then a sort of a foamy, creamy thing and then cherry on the top. Yeah. And it was really good. When we got back to the boat, the ladies were telling our cooks how great this dessert they had, and they described it to the cooks. They prepared that dessert for the next night on the boat, and it was almost exactly like they had served in the restaurant there in New Orleans.
I don't know what it is about cooks on commercial boats, but I have been on several dredge boats and an offshore vessel with my work. The cooks out there, many of them from Louisiana, do an excellent job. Maybe it's just Southern cooking, but in my opinion, the food is always excellent.
Yeah, and they would serve, at lunchtime, we would serve up to 200 people. There was about 50 staff people, Corps people, on the boat for the trip. But every day, the local people would come on for these public hearings, and they would stay on for lunch. And at that time, you'd get just a plate lunch, but it was a really fine plate lunch. Yeah. For breakfast, they made breakfast to order, but that was mostly before anybody else was there other than Corps folks. But yes, nobody went hungry.
I have a very distinct memory of seeing you and that big riverboat in St. Louis when I was a kid. Dad, my middle brother Aaron, and myself, we loaded into the car and drove from the little town of Kirkwood, Missouri, out to the downtown area of St. Louis and met you at some point on the docks, but I forget exactly where that was.
Well, we were parked right under the arch. That's where we stopped in New Orleans. St. Louis. We'd pull up to right near the arch, and that's where we were when you and your family came. And Stephen was a baby boy at that time, about the size of his baby boy today.
Now, we're about to move on to a couple of different topics here, but before we do, is there anything else from the boat or from your time with the Corps that you would like to highlight for us?
Oh, I could talk all afternoon about things that happened on the boat, but
let me tell you one. After Dean got to be the
coordinator
with the general, he was pretty high up, and we went on the boat one night, and I've forgotten who was with us. One of our kids was with us.
Yeah.
But he was telling us, this boat doesn't move until I tell them to move. And I said, okay. And I looked, and the tops of trees were going by the window. And I said, oh, you mean like right now? And he said, no, it's not supposed to be moving. But he went down, and they were moving. And he had not told them to move. But he was bragging about it won't move until I tell it.
But they turned around and went back.
Yeah.
They did. I mean, we had people on there, including her,
including me,
that was supposed to get off. We would stop in Vicksburg on the way down every year, usually on a Wednesday night. And the wives of the Corps folks who lived in Vicksburg and were on the boat, the wives would come on and have dinner with us. Mm-hmm. And so that was what that was.
Yeah.
I guess that fella had a bit of a big head that day.
I guess so.
I don't know exactly what happened there, but I can tell you another story that happened in Vicksburg that's pretty interesting. One of my very best friends, who also worked for the Corps, had gotten married not long before. So we were coming down the river, and we stopped at Vicksburg. And instead of having his wife come on the boat like they usually did to eat with us, he wanted to go home and eat with her. So he left the boat and went to his house. And in preparing for that trip, we had developed two different schedules. We had developed a schedule, and then we changed it by an hour. And so that night, when the dinner was over, I went down to my room and looked at the schedule, and I looked at the wrong schedule, okay? And so at 9 o'clock, it was time to go. So we left. Well, the real schedule should have been 10 o'clock. So here he comes back to the river an hour after we left, and the boat's gone. And so by that time, we had moved a few miles down the river, and his wife, they were talking by telephone to the pilots on the boat. So his wife took him down river, or down by highway to the river, several miles below Vicksburg, and we pulled over to the bank with the searchlights, and here he came walking down the river bank to get on the boat. And his new wife had taken him, actually out into the woods down there to get him on the boat. He was a little upset, but he got over it pretty quick. And then the funny part of it was the Mississippi River Commissioners decided to have a trial. He was accused of, the general called it missing a movement, okay? Now, it was entirely my fault, but they put him on trial. And the commissioners, now this is, like I say, these are 7 men that are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. Dignitaries. They sat in their chairs that they normally sat in at a public hearing, and they had a trial. And they appointed another member to be the attorney. And I remember his defense attorney pleaded ignoramus perfecto, perfect in ignoramus. And they found him guilty, and then they decided, well, we're going to vote by thumb. In other words, thumbs up, he's innocent, thumbs down, he's guilty. And then they said, well, we need to make this a concealed vote. So all of them put their thumbs pointed down, and then they covered their thumb with the other hand. And found him guilty. But it was an interesting, fun time, yeah.
Ignoramus perfecto. That's a new phrase I'm going to use in my everyday life, Pawpaw, and truth be told, I probably fit that bill more often than not. Life in Mississippi sure seems a little bit hectic, doesn't it? From the way you guys met, to the first jobs that you had, all the way through your career, Pawpaw as an engineer on the river. It's amazing what all you've been through, and it's also special to have you guys here to share these things with us. It's not every day that you get to talk with your grandparents and really discover the origins of your family and the history of our country from their eyes. Now, we'll close out, but in doing so, I would like to ask you to please leave a message, send me a message, leave a review on Apple or Spotify podcasts or Facebook or by whatever means possible. And remember that in doing that and in sharing us and specifically leaving comments on Apple and Spotify podcasts, you're allowing us to then reach more people. I've learned kind of the hard way that without those reviews, it's almost impossible to grow the podcast show. And for the sake of sharing the gospel and sharing our stories, I would like to really try my best to reach out to more folks. I thank you all for listening today, and tune in next week. Love in Christ.